And we're good to go. All right, so let's talk about a couple things. Obviously, our next assignment, exercise 3. And keep in mind, guys, this is really just kind of keep the pace of the room moving. And to be fair, we've allowed pretty much 1.5 weeks for exercise 1 and a week or so for exercise 2. Keep in mind those could be in the background. And I would encourage you, if it's not printed today and pinned up, try for Thursday, right? Because keep in mind, I still kind of try to grade these every Friday. I got the pictures on Friday, but I didn't actually grade them until Monday. Again, kind of waiting for some Miro. And again, I got to put a little bit of flame in the fire. Otherwise, what's kind of keeping you going, right? At least in terms of these programs. But let's take a look at exercise 3. I do think this is where it does start to get fun and at least somewhat creative. We start to realize the potential of this program. The ability to iterate is a huge one in architecture. I can't tell you how many times students, we design one sketch and we think, oh, that's the final sketch. And that's definitely not the case. In fact, it'd be thousands of iterations sometimes, especially in the computer, where it can often now iterate by the click of a button. I mean, we have generative AI. That's essentially iterations, right? If you've ever chosen like 4 iterations, it'll produce 4 images for you at the same time, right? Obviously 4, not necessarily meaning better than 1, but definitely more ideas out of 1 prompt. In our case, we're gonna kind of do it old school and build it by hand, but it doesn't mean we have to start from scratch every single time that we build a model. For the most part, we're going to be basically building an abstract model. Now, if you've taken my D1 class, this was your first project, now essentially in one exercise. So to be fair, we're not judging necessarily the composition, but if you've taken D1 and D2, now is your chance to, of course, prove those composition skills, right? The organizing principles, symmetry, rhythm, all kinds, right? However, if you haven't taken D1, that's okay too. Yeah, Robert's in, all right. So let's take a look at it together. Obviously, we're still going from 3D and 2D and really talking about both in between. So this next exercise will begin our first project for the course. We will begin with a simple abstract diagramming to start to understand the iteration ability of the software and how it can be applied to Studio. The final will become a project worthy of portfolio with process and product. So be sure to save work constantly. Abstract composition. As you can see, our wonderful vague rules, and I think I accidentally made a step 5 twice. My apologies. There is 2, that one's obviously step 6. Anyway, let's start off. Create a 30 by 30 square in feet frame to compose your 2D operations. Awesome. And just to kind of give you a hint, we're going to be doing 11 by 17, and we're going to have 3 separate 11 by 17s showing our 3 iterations with a plan view and of course perspective view that we're going to start to get into and start to pin down today. So let's start off with step 1 with a 30 by 30 square. That seems pretty simple enough. I'm going to go with rectangle on this one. Actually, is there a square command? There is not. So it was worth trying. But of course a rectangle can be a square, a square can be a rectangle, but a rectangle can't be a square, as they say. In my case, I've made a couple of layers for my next exercise, just calling it exercise 3, and of course exercise 1 and 2 off to the side just to keep some clarity. But I'm going to go ahead and double click on grids just because it's part of my grid system. Now I'm going to go ahead and type in 30 foot symbol, enter, and you could also type in 30 feet, right? I mean, seems kind of weird, but what's nice at least about Rhino is it accepts both, right? You could type in miles and it's going to actually put it in miles even though our units is feet. So again, kind of a game changer when it comes to other programs. Step 1, check. All right. Step 2, create a 5 by 5 grid system that references as center points. Okay. So in my case, what that means is the spaces, right? So we just want 5 by 5 spaces, and to be fair, well, I'll let you decide how you want to do that. In my case, I want to show a couple of different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and explode my rectangle and get basically 4 sides. When you explode something, any geometry, it'll turn it into its simplest form. Since this was a rectangle, obviously it could go even simpler into 4 separate congruent lines. In our case, since I want to divide this up, maybe I want to divide it up congruently. So I'm going to type in divide. And well, maybe not 33, but let's go with maybe like 5. And that will definitely give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. Awesome. We'll go ahead and keep that one. We'll do the same thing to this one. That, I just clicked the line and hit spacebar twice because I wanted to do the exact same command. So, right, work harder. Work smarter, not harder. Right? In my case, I'm just going to copy from a point and start to create my grids. And I'm in the grid layer, sweet. And again, just taking that copy, choosing a stationary point, and I can lock in with my point on OSNAP. So we can really make sure that it's absolutely perfect. And that would be fine for this assignment. However, I do need 3 iterations, and I don't necessarily need 3 different grids, if you will. So maybe I try 3 different things. Maybe I start with one being congruent, and maybe spicing it up a little bit. I don't know, I particularly like the golden ratio, so I very often try to do golden ratio things, like squares, and just kind of ballparking my golden ratio skills. But you can get fancy with the spices is what I'm talking about, right? Some of you guys maybe took Balderas in D1, or myself, or Kernodle. You probably did some sort of composition at the first, right? Whether it was a bunch of triangles or a bunch of circles, or you had a certain number of planes. But in my case, we can change things up, and look how fast we were able to do that. You know how long that would take me on the drafting table? Longer, arguably. But I can do 3 different things, right? We can start to get fancy with the grid system. I mean, why not? Maybe we go big. I don't know. Maybe that one goes over here. But again, the ability to iterate in this program is amazing. Because just like that, I created 3 different grids without really having to think about it. And as you can see, it was pretty intuitive. I could just move those lines, and I could move them a little bit more strategically, such as moving them, typing in move, clicking a certain element, and moving it by 2 feet, right? So I mean, that is kind of nice about this program, is I can really dial it in just like I would in AutoCAD or Revit or really any other syntax program. So sweet. All right, step 2, check. Using 8 polylines, 5 orthogonal planes, 3 curved lines, compose your abstract diagram. So I put a couple of examples, and again, if you haven't taken D1, you might be absolutely lost, right? Like, what's a composition? However, if you've taken D1 or D2 or in it right now, this is probably somewhat familiar, especially by week 4, right? Because we're definitely talking about composition. But in my case, I might want to mess with, what do you guys think those transfer into? Hatches, right? We could totally make hatches in 2-dimensional. We could just make a circle. There's a polyline. Right, so just to start to get familiar. To be fair, you can just kind of make it as you go, and to be fair, you get 3 different chances, right? Arguably. So let's come up with a couple, and what do we need? Let's start off with some polylines. 8 polylines. All right. So I'm going to select my lines layer, and that's really important, guys, that you start differentiating these layers. It becomes second nature, right? But I can't tell you how much it helps you in Illustrator by just changing the layer, right, altogether, right? Don't be sitting there changing every single line in Illustrator. Don't be sitting there drawing arrows when you can literally, there's an arrow button in Illustrator. So don't waste your time, because there's no time to waste, and after all, they do say time is money. But let's create some polylines. So I'm going to type in polyline, and for the most part, I'm going to hold shift so I can keep that orthogonal and start to compose. That's looking pretty sweet. So I got 1. And for the sake of tutorial, guys, I'm going to basically go as fast as possible. Again, you don't have to necessarily copy my composition or anything like that. You could, right, if you just have nowhere to start. There's number 3. We got a couple to go. Let's go with 5 more. I'm going to go just a straight line here. That's technically still a polyline. And I don't know, maybe I want to do something interesting like an offset. And I want to go with, I don't know, 5 feet. Oh, maybe that's too much. Let's go with 4 feet. Still too much. Let's try 3 feet. Sweet. So again, you can do all kinds of things, of course, in the 2-dimensional realm. However, I'm not going to do the entire assignment, but I do want enough there to, of course, show you some stuff. In my case, let's get some orthogonal planes. It could be the same way. You could also type in polygon. Right? So let's get a polygon involved. Everybody knows what a polygon is. I'm particularly favored of the triangle, so I'm going to go with like a 3-sided polygon. That's looking pretty sweet. I'm going to hold shift to make that congruent or equilateral, right? Of course, once it's made, you can also change it into an isosceles or anything like that. Get fancy with the spices. But I may want to hatch something like that, so hatch. Sweet. And maybe I don't want necessarily all of it. I mean, after all, it is my compositional diagram and it doesn't really have to change 3D yet. So I am going to keep it solid and keep it there. But as you can see, it actually messes with some of the other elements. So, you know, if I wanted to do something like this, trim, and get maybe rid of a piece. I don't think you can actually trim hatches, by the way. So you'll have to do it by like a boundary. So in my case, I'd take all of it, hatch it, and basically select boundary mode, and basically pick the ones that I want. So say that was the ones that I wanted, maybe that piece, this piece. And I know some of us are like, oh my gosh, if I had this ability in D1, it would have been a game changer, right? I mean, kernodles in my D1 alone would have been that much faster, right, to say the very least. However, again, just trying to get fancy with the spices to show you that I do want you to get a little creative on this one. And the whole reason is so that we can have 3 different iterations of it. So, all right, we got one of them. Let's get a circle involved. Love circles. Maybe one there. And again, just trying to use my composition skills. And maybe I actually trim these off. I mean, I don't see why not. Trim. So again, using some of my 2-dimensional skills in order to compose, right? Let's get another circle in there, or offset it, why not? Offset, sweet. Let's hatch that, right? Hatch. Oh, spell hatch correctly. Sweet. So we can definitely get fancy with the compositional elements. And, you know, if maybe that was not the grid, and, well, I mean, not to cheat too much, but we could take this entire thing, we can copy it, put it off to the side, turn our grids back on, and we could use it again. You do not have to reinvent the wheel here. You could actually just do one composition and really start to iterate it. Keep in mind that iteration doesn't necessarily mean brand new. Iteration means change, right, from original. So what I'm trying to say here is, theoretically, this could go a lot faster than simply trying to create something new every single time. However, as you can see, I'm using those skills nicely, at least in the terms of the ability to copy, the ability to divide, the ability to, of course, draw in 2 dimensions first. And as you can see, simply just rotating, right, that composition and recomposing it. I mean, don't get me wrong, these aren't the greatest compositions in the world, and I will give points to those that are obviously making it serious. But in our case, for the sake of the tutorial, you'll see immediately why this will take 2 weeks rather than just 1 week for this exercise, because we need to make 3 models. So, however, we don't have to spend a dime, so that's the good news. Let's keep going. Let's also get 3 curved lines in there just to show you how a curved line works, and we'll do it on that one. Why not? We'll use this essentially a control point curve, and also right click on this one, because there's like a million different ways to make a curve, right? You can make a paraboloid, all kinds of shapes, toroidal. However, my favorite is of course just a point curve. So I'm gonna get fancy with the spices, and why not, right? It's a unique composition. I'll hit enter. And as you guys knew from last time, we can use the control points or F10 to actually dial some of those in. Pretty nice, right? And you are allowed up to 3 of those. So let the races begin of the best composition, right? If you're in D4 or have taken D3, I'll of course be looking a little bit harder for the composition, but not that it should be stressed on how beautiful it is. To be fair, some of the examples of the models, you'll see where that composition really kind of wasn't necessary, and sometimes it was a happy accident, right? As Bob Ross would say. But let's at least get all the components in there so we can at least say that we completed step 3. Step 4 is arguably probably the longest one, right? Extrude and cap and offset the thickness of your lines, your planes, your grids, into a 30 by 30 by 50. All right, so now we have the Z direction basically popping out at us. Now, to be fair, I am going to need this. As you guys saw, we're going to need the plan view and a perspective view. So I don't necessarily want to just get rid of this. In fact, I might just want to copy it. So copy and keep going. And if I really wanted to be organized, I could say, well, this is steps 1 through 3. Not sure if that was a sneeze, but bless you if it was. Sweet, just to stay organized. So in step 4, we have to turn this into a model, and a very specific model, 30 by 30 by 50, right? So we don't just want any model. And right now I'm in parallel view, so I do want to switch that back to some sort of isometric. I just like the way isometric looks. It's got that good feel to it. But I'll go ahead and isolate my model, and again, zoom extents, and get a feel of what I need to do. So I do need it to go up to 50 feet, so we might as well kind of make that wireframe box, right? So in my case, I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'm going to draw a very big rectangle, but I want to do it in the grid structure, just so I don't lose track. So rectangle, click. I'm going to go with 30 feet, enter, and 50 feet, right? Because I can go 50 feet tall. After all, it will eventually be an observation tower. Not to give too much away. From here, I just need to rotate it up. Well, I could do a lot of things to do that. I could use my gumball. Boop. Move it with the letter M, and snap that back on. Not too shabby. It kind of gives me at least a ballpark, a volume, if you will, that starts to maybe encapsulate that. If you wanted it to be maybe a little bit more, you could also copy it. We could really start to get a feel of what that box looks like. You could also take it again and mirror it, especially if it's a box. Boom. So now we have this kind of potential space, if you will, right? And the first thing that I want to do is create some grids for this structure holding it up. This would be very similar to like the dowels, right, that you would use to produce this model physically. We all know that gravity exists, and it's going to cause some of these pieces to fall, or at least relative density, and that the object is more dense than the air that surrounds it. So it goes down. Inversely, helium goes up because it's lighter than air. Anyway, Archimedes' principle at its finest. However, Archimedes' principle is not in Rhino, right? You could do gravity-defying things and not realize it until much later that, uh-oh, I've got floating pieces. So, relatively speaking, you can kind of do it both ways. You can either make the grid first or make the objects first. In my case, at least for tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and make the grid first. So I'm going to switch back to my grid and turn off some of the elements. I'm going to switch to my grids, or I might actually even just switch to another layer, say exercise 3, and we'll go with columns. I mean, call them what they are, right? So we'll switch to columns, and just so we can see it a little bit better, cyan's a pretty cool color, but a dark cyan's even cooler. Anyway, so let's make some objects. In my case, I do want to start to make that grid, and there's a couple ways to do it. What I'm suggesting is either a rectangle of 6 by 6, so 6 inches by 6 inches, sweet, or a circle, spell circle correctly. It is early. Now it does give us an option of a radius or diameter. It's asking for the diameter here, so again, 6 inches. Right? Both of those are highly acceptable, and I would say probably use those because eventually we have to turn this into a real model, and let's face it, those two already come standardized out of the dowel box, right? I mean, you can go to any art supply store and get those exact scaled dowels. Now, if you want to go crazy and you want to get interesting, I'm all for it, but just keep in mind, you want to make it possible. I don't want to see star-shaped columns, or at least go with something like Mies van der Rohe, right? So for instance, he does like a plus sign, so we may have to draw it, and we'll go to our top view just to kind of see what those look like. Oh no, where did my piece go? Is it there? Did I draw in the wrong spot? Oh, there it is. So right, there's that circle and the square. Let's draw another one. I'm just going to kind of do a couple just to kind of give you an idea. Let's take this one. I mean, why Why redo it when I could just take this one, take the center points, boop, spacebar, I'll hit it again, give myself an offset, so offset, I don't know, 0.25 thickness of an inch, boop. And I'm just hitting spacebar to kind of reenact the command again, and then trim it down. So take away anything that I don't need. So in my case, I just want the Mies van der Rohe profile. So I'm gonna get rid of that one, boop, and boop. So we can draw just about anything. I'm gonna join it together. That way I don't accidentally move those around. I wanna get my center point. And to be fair, I kind of fake it till I make it. And it finds a center point for us using those smart tools. Let's get a couple of these just to kind of show you what they look like. Copy. Let's get a couple. Obviously using our grids to dial that in. Alright, so we got some Mies van der Rohe columns, we got some regular HHS columns. Sweet, and some circle columns. However, I kind of want to get all of them just to kind of show you. So copy. Again, we can use that center point to copy. That way we can align it to another center point. And voila, we're done. Now you don't need necessarily the outside, but you're more than welcome to use them. But for the sake of tutorial, I'm going for speed here. So again, just to kind of relay the assignment and give you a ballpark. Again, this isn't really to copy me, but it's just to understand the program. In our case, I mean, why do that one at a time when we can do all of them? So in my case, I kind of want to get the right view of this. There we go. And I can always turn off something if I need to select something. Again, this is the reason why we use layers, guys. You can always turn it off and make it way easier to select something. And that comes with good practice because eventually you'll have 12 somethings, 12 different layers, 24 different layers that have windows, doors, glazing, every single little part in between. And sometimes you don't want to necessarily mess up your doorknobs when you're just trying to, change the columns. Anyway, so being organized is key. I'll say it pretty much every single video. But in our case, let's go ahead and extrude those. Whee! And go up 50 feet. Voila. Not too shabby. Now, I don't think they're capped unless, oh, yeah, I had it set to cap. But sometimes, usually the default is open, so you might want to check those kinds of things. Let's check it out in a rendered view. Nice. All right, so starting to look pretty sweet. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've already saved a lot of money here and time. If I had to go buy those dowels, if I had to start shaping them just so that I could see this view, man, I'd be wasting a lot of money and time. What a great apparatus, right? What a great platform to literally be a scientist and test how these things look or feel or are put together before we even make it or spend a dime. Hence why we use it in architecture, because time is money. Anyway, so we've got some pieces. Let's get some more pieces involved. All right, and again, we can hide some things at the same time. Now we've got some vertical columns. What about our horizontal ones? Let's definitely get those involved too. And just to kind of give you a hint, we're definitely going to be using them in multiple stories or levels. I would recommend 2 or 3. Right? As you can see in some of our models, eventually we need them. But again, I don't want you to get so distracted that we're making an observation tower yet. Don't worry, this is kind of a weekly thing and it's entirely a 9-week project. We're just in week 4, so we still have 5 weeks to go before we get to this awesome model that you see here and how to laser cut it and put it together like a puzzle. Anyway, for this exercise, I want you to reach into your right side of your brain and just think abstractly. Think Calatrava, right? Is anybody familiar with Santiago Calatrava? The wonderful architect slash engineer who literally has his architecture license and his engineering license. And you've probably seen one of his famous works in a Marvel movie, right, to say the very least. But often his architecture is quite sculptural, and lo and behold, we're doing something actually quite sculptural. So I'm going to take my grids and get them off the ground. After all, this is just my 2-dimension, and I do have a copy, so I can't really mess this up. But let's just go ahead and put that off into space, and let's call it my first level. Sweet. I'm going to go with 2 or 3. After all, I know potentially this is going to be an observation tower. So I'm going to copy, and get a couple. Well, before I copy, I might actually want to do something first and make those pieces. In my case, let's go with an I-beam. I mean, don't get me wrong, you don't have to go with an I-beam yourself. If you've taken Tech 1, you probably should though, right? Just for the sake of drawing. And if you've taken it as much as I have, then you, of course, oh no, where's my midpoint? Guess it doesn't want to get my midpoint. Fine, I see how it is. We'll go with 5 inches. I'll just draw by hand. We'll go with an L shape today. Come on. There we go. Smart Tools is basically how I'm kind of doing that, if you notice. Keep in mind, you can always redraw these as well. Again, a wonderful program where you really can't mess up. But let's say that was my beam. It was just like a C channel beam, or sorry, L channel. Right? I could basically essentially put that anywhere, and I might want to do that in 3 dimensions so I could see it. Woo, where'd it go? Well, it's always going to be in that green line, that red line, right? And of course, our origin point. So when you draw something, what's kind of helpful about that, and maybe I start to explain this, you can control your C-plane. Some of you might have accidentally moved it around yourself. What's kind of nice about changing the C-plane is, well, if I need to draw an exact spot, I can, right? And that's kind of nice because now my C-plane is over there. However, the C-plane does not edit undo. So if I do Command Z, it won't go back because it's not really a part of it. I'm changing really the rhinoceros system. However, if I'm drawing very specific locations and I want that to be at an origin point, I can, right? So just keep that in mind, right? You can definitely change your C-plane. If I want to change that back, however, I'll type in C-plane, enter. I'll select world, right here, and I'll default it back to a top view, right? And it'll default back to where it was. Anyway, I don't know who needs to know that, but again, if that makes drawing easier for the spot that you want it, fantastic. I didn't know that until like 5 years in, so again, it wasn't like a huge thing, but yeah, if I would have known it from the beginning, I would have used it obviously a lot more. But in my case, I just kind of know where they're drawn now, and I just move them over with Gumball. Again, it's a few extra clicks, but not enough to cry about. So in my case, I'm going to move these and use a tool that I used in exercise 2. I'm going to sweep them. Why not? Sweep, 1. I'll take my rail, boop, and my profile, boop. Choose a direction, which in this case doesn't matter, and sweep it. I need to close it as well, so I'm going to cap it. Awesome. And right there, I've got a pretty cool one. What's another one I could do? I could do pipe, but that's going to really kind of take the center point of my line and really stretch it out. Maybe I don't want to do that necessarily, so I'm going to draw a circle. And again, when you draw in the perspective view, keep in mind it's always going to draw in like a top view. So again, typing in 6 inches and just rotating it, not the end of the world. But in my case, if I do want to keep it and maintain it a circle, boop. Let's focus in on that. I do want to get the top of my circle. So again, I'm going to move it, boop, and move that down. I could sweep it, probably the smartest way here. So rail, profile, enter, enter. I do think there's an option to cap it, so like close sweep. What? Did it close? No? Guess it doesn't want to, but cap still works. But again, honestly, I wouldn't get too fancy with the spices. If you pick circles, I would stay with circles. If you pick squares, stay with squares. I mean, if you kind of want to spice it up and go like realistic, if you're like in D4 and you're like ready to put some I-beams in there and you really want to like make this thing look real, you're more than welcome to. You know, I'm looking at you, Emily, with the queen of spices for sure. Not a bad thing, but it is time consuming. So very often we do a lot more in the digital realm than we ever even get to talk about. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to show my professor my Rhino realm, and they often say, show me a printout, because they don't like looking at the Rhino realm. So again, just be cognizant of those kinds of things. But in my case, let's keep going, and let's say we're going with circles today. Why not? You know, not a big deal. So I'm going to take a intersection point, and again, make sure that I'm hitting my grids right there. And I'm just going to take those for today. So boop, boop. And as you can see, selecting things can start to become difficult. In my case, I'm going to mirror it and use my geometry skills, right, to of course use some proofs and make some things. In my case, select all of them and copy them. Because who wants to do all of that over again? But I do want to get a couple layers involved. So we'll get 1, 2, no big deal there. Let's get our columns back in place and voila. As you can see, man, I've saved myself a lot of time. If I had to build this model for Studio, shoot, I'd still be getting started at just like cutting little dowels still. Anyway, the amazement of time, right? So we've got our grid system. We definitely have something that can start to hold up our pieces potentially. And definitely not bad. It's starting to shape up. Let's go back to a shaded view and keep going. In my case, maybe I want to save that step just in case I feel like I'm going to mess up. And again, never feel like, you can't just copy it, because you can, right? To be fair, I could do this step now with all my grids. I could use, I don't have to make all these different things, right? Really can use different grids, but now just changing the grid system. Does that make sense, guys? So potentially, actually, what I could do is copy this one, right? Copy. And basically move those around. Again, potentially working on 3 models at a time rather than just one. So it is a game changer, but if that looks absolutely confusing to you, you don't have to, right? To say the very least. Again, just trying to show the potential of this program. And very often, sometimes I'll get sidetracked with a new idea and I'll make it off to the side. Go with that one instead. And I start to have these like trees, these branches of ideas, if you will, where one idea turned into 3. Those 3 ideas, I actually focused on one and turned that one into 3. So again, realizing the way that design works is not a linear path sometimes. In fact, sometimes it's much more branch-like or even circular, if you will, right? Anyway, not to talk too much about design, because at the end of the day, that is not what I'm judging, really just the character of the work. So in our case, let's make a couple of walls. I do want to make these 3-dimensional, and they don't necessarily have to be on the ground anymore. I do have this structural system that can potentially hold it up. So let's get something. And right now, if I extrude this, it's almost like paper, right? And I don't know about you, but we don't have paper walls. Well, kind of, but we don't really want paper walls. So we do want to give those some kind of thickness. In my case, I could make the surface first. So let's go ahead and do that. Extrude, curve. Let's get fancy with it. I mean, that's pretty cool. Copy. Nobody said I couldn't add some rhythm to it, so I'm going to go to a different view and get fancy. Nobody said I couldn't do it 3 times either, because, well, from the top it's still the exact same view, still the exact same curve. Nobody said I had to make these all the same size either. So again, just trying to get fancy with the spices and show you that I do really want you to use exercise 3 as your creative outlet. My goodness, I want to see, for those of us that are very creative, let's see 3 interesting compositions. However, if you're still learning the program, maybe change just the grids, right? Or maybe just change some of the rhythms of the shapes, those kinds of things. We'll play it by ear based on the level of architecture that we've taken so far. But from there, I don't need paper walls, so let's give them a thickness and offset surface. So offset surf, and we can really choose either direction. If you click on this, you can kind of go this way or that way. In my case, let's go with like a 6-inch wall. 6 inches, enter, and that would be under my distance. Enter again, and voila, we have a wall. A beautifully curved wall, that is. And it does start to be held by certain items, right? At least potentially speaking, right? If I were to 3D print that and slide it onto that square, it would work, right? At least theoretically speaking. Let's get some others. I didn't say they had to be all the same size. Let's go with maybe a 12-inch wall. Real thick. Oh yeah, look at that. So really, we can do a lot here, and arguably faster than anybody ever could in an entire model. I'm gonna go back to the 6 inches. Just typical walls in modern society are about 6 inches. To be fair, these are like 2 feet by 2 feet, and you guys might know it, the columns inside these are actually only 1 foot by 1 foot. There's a lot of space in there. Again, I'm not sure why they wanted to eliminate some square footage from this room, but they sure did. Anyway, 1992 was brutal. Oh wait, when they redid this building, I think it was in 2013. Anyway, not important. So we got some walls, we got some curved shapes, and maybe I want to get fancy with the spices and really lock in, right? I mean, that's starting to look pretty interesting. And if I really wanted to see what that maybe looked like in the light, I could even make a spotlight. Boop. Sweet. I could take that point and really kind of give it that character. Take the whole thing. Pretty sure I can still take the whole thing. Yep, there we go. Boop. And let's see what that looks like so far in a rendered view. Woo! It's looking like it's way up in space, right? And it's usually because I have an object down here that's basically saying, hey, your ground plane's way lower than it should be. You can also type in ground plane, and you could turn that off, right? But then the shadows aren't casted. So be aware that if you don't have any shadows from the get-go, it might mean that your ground plane is just not on, right? Or that our lowest object is not actually closest to the low, which could be the case, and yeah, obviously is the case with our assignment. If you do want to change that, we could just basically hide those and view that again. Hey, view it. Oh, I guess I have nothing selected. Boop, there we go. Now we got the shadows seemingly on the ground plane, and actually I think I have a couple of spotlights involved, but again, as you can see, I don't know how many of you guys have taken graphics too, but do you remember calculating all those crazy shadows on the ground? You may be about to if you're in Graphics 2 with Bohuslav or Balderas or Nick Risen. So potentially you could use this program to solve some of those things. Or if you took my Graphics 2, right, where we kind of did both, this and of course the analog style. Anyway, I like showing off the program, but we don't necessarily need that for right now. For the sake of tutorial, I do want to do every single one of these pieces. So yep, even this line, let's extrude it. Let's at least start as a paper, right? And get some fanciness in there. Right? Why not? Interlocking pieces. We definitely don't just want it to float though, right? Uh-oh. I think I've got one that's just floating. So I might want to at least potentially put it up a little bit so that it does lock into something and potentially doesn't have to float. But already becoming quite architectural if you ask me. Let's offset it again. So offset surface. Oop. Probably want to type in more than just O. Offset surface. Let's go with, I don't know, 12 inches. Why not? Go big or go home. Look at that. What a game changer, right? I would have had to cut out some chipboard, some museum board, some cost, my wallet. Anyway, a lot involved in that. However, you'll notice that hatches don't do an extrusion. Those were really just used for us so that we can start to play with the line weight and maybe the hatching of actually our two-dimensional plane. Now, for this, since we have a copy, no big deal. We got a copy over here. We'll use that for our plan view. But for this one, I may want to extrude at the same time. So I'll take both and extrude it. Oh, spell extrude. And we could take the whole thing. You know, honestly, this one's looking kind of cool. I kind of want to get rhythmic with it. I mean, why not? Can really start to establish a core of some kind. I don't know. Maybe I have a spiral stair there. I'm just kidding. I could do it this way, right? Just kind of copy it, kind of fake it, but it looks unordered, you know, and especially if I'm trying to go for something perfect or ordered, maybe I want to use something called array. So I'll type in array. I'll switch views. And sorry, I'm kind of getting a lot up over here. Let's put this back inside. Please go back inside. Sometimes while I'm screen recording, like, it has a really hard time going back into these things. So let's see if I can get it. Come on. It was worth a shot. It's okay. Don't want to spend time messing around with that, but it does bother me. You can always move these, and you could also just reset it. So if like you go to window, and I know I did this a couple of times, but you can go to window layout, and again go to a default, and just print yes, and apply. And it'll basically go back to the original, right? But again, you might have to set up your settings again and everything like that. I don't know. In our case, let's make that array. So it's asking for the number in the X, which is 1. I don't want to copy it necessarily in the X, and I don't necessarily want to copy it in the Y, but maybe I want 12 in the Z direction. So I'll hit 12. I'll click for my base point and basically go, oh, I can make all of these at the exact same time. Boom. Enter, and we'll save that, keep it. Not gonna lie, I made that look a little too easy. Array can be a little difficult, but I always like nailing that live. But again, we can get fancy with the spices here, right? Especially when things are starting to lock in terms of the grid, right? So maybe I need a ghosted view to kind of see that interlocking. And sweet, potentially that one's gonna hold it, so I think we're okay. Not too shabby. So again, I just really want you to play around with going from 2D to 3D. And just to kind of call out some of the things that we already did was extrude curve, right? That was just taking it and turning it into paper. We can offset surface, so we can control the distance of that paper, right? And I know there's a third one in there, but I just can't remember it. Anyway, let's make sure we're on track. Number 5, and number 5 again. Number 5, compose a 3D model abstraction. And clearly what we're doing here, right, is starting to abstract and really start to create an interesting model. Now, as you know, we need 3 of those interesting models. They could be similar parts, but again, something should be changed. Whether you use the same grid 3 times and you change the parts, or maybe you use the same parts but have different grids. So again, however, you could get really wild with these, and I do have some examples to show you as well at the end of this tutorial. I won't put it in the video because it does have the students' names, but I do want to show you, like, during the summer I had Kim Lago, if you guys know her, and she got really awesome with the colors of what I'm about to show you now, and of course the rendering abilities that Rhino has. So I do want to jump into that, but again, this isn't where you want to stop. Make sure that you get all of the pieces, right? Maybe these very interesting ones that we came up with could actually lead to some very interesting results, right? I may need to even trace that out again or generate from a hatch, which we can do as well. So you can make polylines from a hatch, or you can basically retrace them, right? You can also make 2D of a hatch, which is another way of flattening it and turning it into a polygon as well. However, the one thing we can't do is extrude a hatch, so just be aware of that. As you can see, it doesn't even give me the option to scale it in that Z direction because it's only a 2-dimensional object. Anyway, for the sake of tutorial and really the rest of the assignment, maybe this wasn't a part 2 after all, but you know, get more fancy with the spices, but we do have 16 minutes and I do want to show you this very crucial part. Let's materialize it. So in my case, I kind of want to hide everything else. Try to keep things a little organized. And we'll go ahead and hide those. In my case, I maybe want to set up my view or the materials first. So, well, let's go ahead and click on something or some things, and let's change the material. To change the material, you'll go to the properties wheel, click, and you'll see this little squeezed paint tube. If you highlight over it, it says the material. We'll click on that tab, and by default, there's usually none set, right, from the very beginning. We'll click on that, and we do have some already made for us, such as like a default material, which is that gray that you see on pretty much every object or shaded object. We'll click the plus sign, and as you can see, there's quite a few of pre-made ones, such as plastic, plaster. You can even set your own picture, like say you had a picture of liquid water, boom, you can put it right on there, right? Very similar to any program like Blender or arguably just many other 3-dimensional programs. You can just basically wrap a texture on side of an object. But what's kind of nice is I don't necessarily have to maintain the layer or the object. In fact, you can change all of these. And in fact, we can even make it look like a cloud, but not the point of today. However, I typically use plastic because it kind of gives that nice shiny look and makes it start to look a little bit toy-like. And again, that's playful and familiar for most of my clients who, as soon as I put it as metal, they, instead of looking at the design, they go, is the metal really that shiny? And again, that takes away their focus from the design and they start to worry about the realistic rendering ability of the software. And that's not necessarily what we want our clients to be focused on. obviously we want to show them the composition. So in my case, I'm going to go with plastic and maybe go with a red. Who doesn't love red plastic? We can even add transparency. And as you can see, we can actually add a couple of things such as the reflectivity, the clarity of the object, and at least for plastic presets, that's about all we have, right? Not too bad. Keep in mind that if I click on another one, like the plus sign, it'll actually add it back to here, but it'll make it a new layer, which is kind of nice because I may want to use that red plastic again. I'm going to go with the, I don't know, just to kind of show you the different abilities that it has, such as like glass. You'll see that there's some other options in glass, such as like, I don't know, making it slightly blue. It's funny, everybody draws or renders glass as blue, but if you look at it right now, is it any color? No, it's always the reflection of what it is. So don't get me wrong, it is one of those things that you kind of have to stare at for a while and go, really, what color is that? In my case, I'm going to go with like a light blue for the sake of that cartoony look. And go with IDR is basically your index, refractive index. Not super important, but does start to get really scientific. After all, this simulation of Rhino is simulating what? Reality. And in reality, we have a refractive index. So don't get me wrong, the more we know about reality, the more that we can potentially know about this program and what it's simulating. However, if you don't know what an IDR is, it's not huge. You could be a scientist and just mess around with it, see what it does differently versus the other way around on the spectrum. However, for clarity, I kind of want that blurry look to it, so I'm going to go with a blurry look. And you'll notice in the preview, it doesn't show anything. Darn, right? Not a big deal. We'll go to the rendered view, and whoa, it's kind of there. And maybe you can't see it on the projector. Oh, you kind of see it on the projector. What's kind of nice about that is we can go back to that view, and you could do it in the rendered view as well. So maybe more clarity. Oh, there's that little shine. That's what clarity does. IDR, can't really tell because of our black background. But say if I had an image behind it, it would start to do that thing if you've ever looked at a spoon. Have you guys ever looked at a spoon and it's like an upside down image and you thought to yourself, how is it doing that? And of course it has everything to do with the reflectability of that spoon, right? And arguably we can do the exact same thing in Rhino. But again, I don't recommend using glass for your objects. As you can see, they're kind of hard to see. However, if you wanted to mess around with it, by all means, right? Definitely mess around with it. Clearly black just made that much worse. Let's try a red. And as you can see, it's not very clear. There's almost too much transparency when it comes to the glass. However, what's nice is I can quickly switch that to plastic and really start to get a tangible sensibility out of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, the shadows are nuts. I'll change that in a second. But well, it does start to materialize it, and in a very simple and fast way. Now I can take essentially all these pieces, or make that easier for myself, and go to a scaled view. We could take all those pieces by holding Shift and clicking on each one. I guess that is much more the manual way. You could go like that, boop, but you risk accidentally grabbing a bunch of things. So in my case, I'm going to go with some red plastic on this one, and just switch those all to a red plastic. Sweet. Let's go with maybe my grids. Maybe I do want something that looks maybe like wood or a dowel or even metal, right? I mean, why not? Let's get to my layers. Let's make that a lot easier to grab. So let's turn those off. And I just need my grids. So let's go to that one. Boop. And of course turn that one off. That way I can select those a lot easier and just simply change them. So again, properties, little paint tube, click, and let's go ahead and make another one. So let's see what metal does. Why not? We'll go with metal. Clearly white metal might not be easy to see, especially, well, it might be easy to see with a black background, but you won't be able to see kind of the detail of the reflectivity going on. So let's choose something more like steel. Sweet. And usually you can control the reflectivity, and that's about it, right? Kind of going for a rough look. But again, you don't see any changes until you go to a rendered view. So be aware. Ooh, you guys see that like glow around it? Right, that's the reflectivity, right? And that's pretty nice. It's just ray traced in real time with the world's longest shadows. We'll change that. Here, let's really change that. We'll type in lights, because I had a previous light that I put in, I think, last time. So we can control the sun and the skylight, and as you can see, they make a huge difference on, you know, what you're looking at. In my case, I forgot that I put on the sun in here, and that's cool. So we'll type in sun, and we'll change that really quick in a manual way. So I'll change it to manual. And honestly, I do this so many times, like, it's fair, I can't remember exactly what I did in exactly every single video every semester. So often I do repeat myself, and I do apologize. But that's looking pretty sweet, and at least starting to look like metal, at least in a cartoon way, right? And at least in enough way to show the client what we mean. In my case, my background is black, so I might want to actually switch the studio background. So let's go ahead and do so. In my case, it's stuck on that tab. But honestly, I don't even really know what to call this. It's like a hemisphere dome button. And again, if you highlight over it, it's just called environments. You can just type in environments. That's kind of the bonus about Rhinos. If you can't find the icon, at least know the name. And if you don't know the name, at least know where the icon is and what it looks like. However, we can change the environment. And for mine, I'm going to switch to something a little easier to look at. You might notice there's not really anything in there. So let's change that up. In my case, background color, and as you see, it's not having any effect, and it should, of course, in this rendered view. So I may have some different settings actually involved. Well, let's go ahead and go to Studio and see if we can override those settings. It doesn't look like it. Typically, you can just double click on it and it will switch. However, it might be stuck. Let's try another thing. So we can right click on this blue render box, and it'll bring up a bunch of rendered settings, and there it is, right? It's stuck on black, so I'm going to switch it back to a 360 environment, and it gets a little bit better, right? I start to see some of the lights that are involved. And to be fair, these are also interchangeable as well, and it comes with some other presets. For instance, a basic environment, right? I can make one myself, and that's pretty nice. You can change the background. You can even go into Google Earth and get the street view and put your model potentially in the site. Now, we're not going to necessarily do that today or anything like that, but again, pretty useful tool there. In my case, I'm going to put these back in here because it's starting to get super wild there. Get out of here. Go back. But as you can see, screen recording always fails me. I don't know what it is. I think it's a screen density, if you will, but it just doesn't. Almost. But it's just going to put it there. Anyway, you should be able to have a lot easier time, especially with the bigger screen that you may or may not have. In my case, I wish there was a button. As you can see, kind of just putting it back into these tabs. Ah, there we go. Voila. So I'll spend a little bit of time, of course, getting those over. But see, then you get to the last one, you don't know what to do. Anyway, however, just to run that back, obviously right-clicking. Hey, it brings it back. Very cool. Learn something new every day. Dynamic help, go away. I don't need your help. In my case, we could mess with the environments, could mess with the sun. Let's get some of those other layers involved, though, so we can actually see what we're doing. Layers, and let's turn those back on. Nice. All right, so we're starting to really get somewhere here, at least in terms of completion, right? Now, don't get me wrong, I do want to materialize everything, and what's really nice about this too is as soon as I apply it to one thing and I change that material, it is going to change all of those, right? At least in those columns. Now, I forgot to get my beams, right? I accidentally left those as white. That's okay. I'll go back to my shaded. It might be a little easier to see if I go into this view. And let's get those. Boop. Hold shift and get those. Boop. Not too shabby. And let's change those to metal. And do one less reflectivity on those. See what it looks like. And voila. Not too shabby. Oh, I think it actually left it as white. My bad. Let's try that again. Why didn't you change? Oh. Perhaps. No, it says metal. Right click. Oh, assign to objects. Sweet. And those are changed. Not too bad. Let's go ahead and make another plastic. I can't stand just like no color in there. And again, this is where you can really start to get fancy with the colors and really start to test the ability of the shade and shadow, which I need to get to next before we end in 4 minutes. Anyway, so let's make a new layer. Where's my little button? No! This is what happens when you actually try and move everything around. Oh, there it goes. It's right in the top corner. Can't miss it. In my case, let's make another plastic. And I'm going to go with that blue. I don't know, I just like blue for today. Not so much reflectivity and a little bit more clarity. And I can even add transparency here. So that's kind of nice. Again, I'm going to select these three. Right click on the material and assign to objects. Boop. Sweet. Not too shabby. Ooh, you can even see that reflectivity and the transparency in there. Again, what a game changer to show this immediately to my professor. Now, I wouldn't show necessarily my Rhino screen, right? Because, well, let's face it, some of the older gentlemen and ladies, they don't like looking at the screen because they have terrible eyesight like I do, right? So very often you need to print this out and give it some line work. Well, how in the world are we going to give this line work? That sounds like very complex. Or we could just make 2D, right? So let's at least get that, but I do need an exact view, right? Because I might accidentally change it or accidentally might move it. So I'd want to lock that down as well. In my case, well, let's get the materials back over here. Oh man, come on, just get in there. Anyway, maybe if we exit it, it'll come back in our properties. No, it's gone. But again, you can't mess up. Windows layout, default. And honestly, you shouldn't have to do this. This is only because I'm screen recording and it doesn't like me changing the windows. So you should have, of course, no problem unless you're screen recording. Anyway, but just so you can see everything and get back. Where'd it go? Oh, you do have to click on an object. So maybe it was there the whole time. Anyway, looking pretty good there. So let's change maybe the sun settings because that's looking kind of weird. There's kind of like a interesting thing going on there. And it could be my ground plane, so let's test some things. Ground plane. Show underside. Yeah, there we go. Man, I cannot just get rid of some of these things. Again, try not to mess around with your windows like I am. Alright. So let's type in sun, dial that in as well. Usually we don't have to mess with the intensity too much. As you can see, it can become way too bright, but you can dial it in. Usually it's defaulted at 1. I don't really recommend using that one too much. But dialing in the shadow is definitely key because we do start to see some of the elements starting to project onto the elements itself, which is highly interesting. And let's say that was the view that I wanted. However, maybe I do want to add some drama. I want to get that 2-point perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Set View and make it a 2-point perspective. Awesome. I'm going to zoom in, and boy, that's starting to look pretty interesting, right? Especially architecturally and showing off the character. Starting to look something like right out of Graphics 2. All right, not too bad. But I want to save this view and save, maybe dial in my shadows a little bit more. And as you can see, it does update as we go. So, I mean, we don't want too much light. We also don't want to be right where the sun is behind us. Very often we go to the left or to the right in terms of the shadow. Not really a big deal here. I'd go with whichever one you prefer. But as you can see, we can calculate every single shadow in a matter of seconds. And I'll dial that in just a little bit back. But I want to save that view, and it's super easy. Click on that down arrow of the viewport. I'll go to Set View and make sure that you have toggled Name Views. Sorry, right there. Mine was already toggled, so it'll bring up this view. And as you can see, let me just get rid of these real quick. Act like I didn't even have them. I'm a fresh, right? But I'd want to dial in this view just right because once I hit save, it's stuck on that view until I save another one. So I'll hit the plus arrow and I'll say Model 1. And I want to take that exact model, so even if I accidentally mess it up, oh man, what happened? Double click on my view, voila, and it goes right back to that view. Which is really great because I want to get the line work and make 2D. So let's complete the assignment real quick. Make 2D. Honestly, the more lines you have, the longer this process will take. So I want to make sure I maintain source layers. I don't know if I want to get hidden lines involved, at least for the sake of tutorial and speed. You, on the other hand, might want that. By the way, there was a really great example in Emily's last exercise 1, showing off really those hidden lines and the abilities of what we can do with those. Obviously looking for that in exercise 2. Anyway, we'll apply, we'll make 2D of that wonderful view, and it makes it off in the background. Sweet. Man, can you imagine if I had to do that all by hand? I would be here forever. And in some cases, I still can delete things that I don't want. So for instance, that bounding box and maybe even the lines on the ground. I no longer need those. But maybe I want to show off the materials that I chose and everything like that. So again, when in doubt, you can always, of course, draw these things. Like, for instance, what if that needed to be longer? Well, just make it longer, you know, those kinds of things. Anyway, I do want this exact view, so let's go ahead and render it. I want to double click on my view again just to dial that in, because if I accidentally get that view and that view and that view and that view, do you think it's going to line up with my lines? No, not at all. So again, I'd want to save that view and make sure I make 2D that view and I get that view. In my case, we can click on this little render button, and when you right click on it, you can get all the settings. In my case, let's just go with some dummy settings for today. So dimensions, again, obviously more pixels, the longer it'll take. 4K, I mean, we can really get up there. In my case, I'm just gonna viewport, right? So whatever it is on the screen, that's just what it's gonna render for us. We can change the environment for that render, as you guys know. And again, I kind of want to see what you guys are capable of now, having a plethora of settings to work with. And again, work with you within the next 2 weeks in obviously developing some of our rendering skills. But let's go ahead and hit render and see what it does. To be fair, screen recording is also terrible at this. But as you can see, it really starts to dial in the shadow work, really starts to dial in the material. And since I chose a pretty low resolution, it's already done. As you can see, it took about a whopping 2.19 seconds, which is pretty good for today's computers. Now in my case, I'd want to save it, so save, and turn that into a JPEG or a PNG or, you know, just about anything that you wanted. In my case, we'll call it the test image. And I have no idea where I saved it, so let's try that again. Okay, it's on my desktop. Once it's done rendering, you can exit. We'll go back to my original view and we'll put that in here. We'll type in picture, enter, and we'll take that test image and voila, right? We can dial those in, and as you can see, I may have to line up one thing first, boop, and of course scale it. So I'll type in scale, and in my case I want to choose this part that I know and this part where I'm going. So I may want to do that a little bit easier and really lock in. But as you can see, it's not always perfect. So let's try that again. Scale. And take 1 point. And as you can see, I think it was my alignment with the other piece. But, whoop. Not too shabby. So now we can take this into Illustrator. We can both have nice, cool colors, interesting backgrounds, and we can still apply the line weight to our three-dimensional images. So I'm not done. For my 11 by 17, I do need 8 of them. So let's go ahead and show everything and get our layers back. And oh my gosh, I have to deal with these windows again. Stop it! Look how many blue boxes come up. That's not right. Anyway, we'll reset it one last time for today. So default. And again, if you just don't even see those tools, right? We've done it a couple of times because students definitely run into this, especially with the school computers, and a lot of people accidentally delete a window or two. So again, resetting that. Let's get my 11 by 17. Why work harder when I can work smarter and just take this one? Boop. So again, my 11 by 17. Why is my grid snap on? Anyway, okay. I'll take the plan view and my three-dimensional view, and I could trim that, by the way. So trim, whoop, rectangle, whoop. Take this piece, trim it. You can even trim photos. How cool is that? Rhino did not always do that, by the way. But I do need a plan view, and to be fair, we're still not at any scale. It's still just an abstract model. But I'd like you to show off each iteration. So maybe this is iteration 1. Awesome. We have a perspective view, a floor plan, and perhaps we call it iteration 1. Maybe not too big, but enough to see it. And as you can imagine, we need 3 of these. So don't just copy it like I'm doing for the sake of tutorial, but pretty much that's what we need for our next printout. Obviously, the floor plan, and of course the perspective view. Now, this one goes pretty fast, right? So I would recommend definitely watching it a little bit, pausing, and kind of testing out some things yourself. This is where I definitely want you to become a young scientist, right? Test some things. However, testing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insanity, right? Try some things out, of course, right? Change your dependent variables to see if the independent variable changes, those kinds of things. However, just to cover all of our bases, because we went over a lot today, let's go back into a shaded view. And let's get out of our 2-point perspective, because that's wild. Look at that. All right. So we covered, obviously, the grid, divide, subdivide, offset, hatching, boundary mode, some of that, obviously a review. We went over that, obviously, we need to make 3 different models, but again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we start. We can use previous components and use the ability of copying. We also went over extruding curves and offsetting surfaces in order to make some of those walls, right? And of course that we can, as much as we rhythmically compose it in 2D, we can compose it in 3 dimensions as well. So definitely practice those things. We messed around with the materialization, right? Testing between different colors, plastics, and different abilities that the render engine has. We went over the sun, we went over some spotlights, we went over the ground plane. A lot of stuff involved here. So hopefully you were totally writing them down and don't have to watch an entire hour video just to get one word out. Again, work smarter, not harder, guys. But they are recorded, so there is that. And as you can see, I didn't make a copy of my 2D. In my case, I'd probably want to make 2D of that top view in order to use it for my quote-unquote floor plan. Or I could simply just use this one. In my case, I accidentally made a copy of that, so let's fix that real quick. Boop. Again, can't mess up. Probably easier in my top view. And let's just take that one. Sweet. Because that would be way easier, and in fact the only way to edit it in Illustrator. Any questions off the bat, guys? I know there's a lot there. So, anyway, we'll leave it there for today and call it a day.